Today is our midterm examination, a chance for you to question and examine me. All right, so before we look at the questions for the midterm examination, I want to discuss briefly the ceasefire between the United States and Iran. So yesterday, Donald Trump announced that there will be a 2-week pause to this war, and that the United States and Iran will meet in Pakistan to negotiate a possible long-term ceasefire. And what he said that's very important is that he will use the 10-point Iranian plan as a framework to discuss a peace treaty. And as you can see from the 10-point plan, in fact, this is almost a complete U.S. surrender to Iran. The first point is that the United States will guarantee never to attack Iran again. Iran will have complete control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran can choose to enrich uranium for its nuclear program. All sanctions on Iran will be removed. This is a very big deal. Removal of all secondary sanctions against foreign entities that do business with Iran, and of all United Nations Security Council resolutions against Iran, and of all International Atomic Energy Agency resolutions, compensation, reparations for all the damage that the United States and Israel did to Iran, withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the Middle East, giving Iran control over the Middle East. And the last, and the most important, is that the United States will also agree to end hostilities against all of Iran's proxies, including Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. So as you can see, this is basically a complete U.S. surrender to Iran, which tells us right away that Donald Trump is not serious. If you go into a shop and you negotiate with the shop owner and you want to sell maybe a book to the guy and you're hoping for $100, but because it's bargaining, you think, maybe I should start high, so you say $1,000. If you say $1,000 and the shop owner says, yeah, I'll take that deal, there's something wrong here, okay? All right, so there's something very wrong, and there's very little chance that the ceasefire will hold. And in fact, we're already seeing news that the ceasefire is being broken, okay? So there are 3 individuals on Twitter who've made some very interesting points. All right, so in this tweet, Mr. Bojak said that, listen, if this is really a ceasefire, why is the United States continuing to send aircraft carriers, the USS George Bush, to the Middle East? What they're really trying to do is buy time in order for their ground troops to get ready to attack and seize the strait. Okay? So once everything's in position, then probably what will happen is that Israel will launch a false flag against the Americans, which will justify an American attack against Iran. All right? So that's a possible scenario. But again, the question is, if this is really a ceasefire, if Donald Trump is really intent on peace, why does he continue to send U.S. forces to the Middle East? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, the problem is how Iran is defending itself. It's using something called the Mosaic defense, which is to say that it has 31 provinces, and these are 31 cells or units that are all responsible for their own strategy and attack and defense, meaning that there's no longer a centralized command. So it doesn't matter if you negotiate with the leadership of Iran, because the IRGC, the people who are fighting, will not agree to a ceasefire because they do not trust the Americans or the Israelis. So whatever happens in Pakistan will not affect the outcome of the battlefield. And that's a problem with the Mossack defense. Think of the Mossack defense as almost a dead man switch, where if you kill the Ayatollah will tell his people to fight to the end. So the Mossack defense will only come to an end if either Iran is defeated or the Americans are defeated. This thing collapses if there's in between a ceasefire. Because in order for the Iranians to implement the ceasefire, they themselves will have to go and control these Mossack units in the provinces, which basically means a civil war. Okay? So it's almost impossible, even if Iran were to negotiate a favorable peace deal, for Iran to actually implement this peace deal within its military. Okay? That's problem number 2. Problem number 3 is the United States continues to have an air bridge to the Middle East. So even though there's a ceasefire, you have these massive movement of US ground troops, of US planes, of US artillery and tanks to the Middle East. So if there's really a peace, why is this happening? And another way of saying this is that the political systems of both the United States and Iran have lost control over the war. Once these militaries start fighting, they are determined to fight to the bitter end. Okay? But unfortunately, what this tells me, the fact that Iran is willing to negotiate a peace treaty, probably means that there is a schism or divide between the political leadership in Iran and the military leadership in Iran. And this is going to cause a lot of problems in the future. So maybe before this past month, it seemed as though that Iran had control over the battlefield and Iran was winning it. But I think over time, what's going to happen is that fissures will arise in Iran, and Iran will start losing the battle more and more as the United States and Israel develop a much more coherent strategy against Iran. Another major issue is that as this war drags on, the world economy is going to suffer, which means that people can no longer drive their cars, and which means maybe a lot of people will also starve. And this means that ultimately public or global opinion will slowly turn against Iran. Okay? And even Iran's closest allies, Russia and China, will feel the strain of this war and maybe even pressure Iran to end this war. But again, as we discussed previously, because of the way that Iran has structured its military defense, it is impossible for Iran to end this war unless it's either destroyed or it's destroyed the Americans. Okay? So this war, this ceasefire, it's only a PR stunt. It will actually lead to nothing. All right. The major point, okay, of contention is whether or not Lebanon is part of the peace treaty. So the Iranians believe that this peace treaty also includes its proxies, specifically Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. But after this peace treaty was announced, Israel launched more than 100 strikes in 10 minutes across Lebanon, killing 250 people, at least 250 people. Okay? So Iran is obligated to defend Hezbollah morally. And Israel understands that if Iran breaks the peace treaty and defends Hezbollah, then it is Iran's fault, okay? And the Americans have come out and said that, well, you know, we agreed that Lebanon was not part of the deal. And J.D. Vance, the vice president, said, oh, it's a legitimate misunderstanding. We thought that Hezbollah wasn't part of this deal, but the Iranians thought it was. Okay, so this is a misunderstanding, okay? But this tells you that the Americans and Israelis are not serious about maintaining the ceasefire. Okay, they've already found a loophole. All right.